Hi, good evening. It was just a thought since long that something should be brought in social media or through this e-platform pertaining to the things which are right now in, you can say, very much in news. I have seen through several WhatsApp groups. Also, we have faced, many of my client has faced and are facing the notices from the registrar of companies, and nowadays the registrar of companies in the capacity of being an adjudicating officer are serving so many notices to the clients citing the deficiencies or the non-compliances or the defaults which the companies and its directors are doing, and the actions are being initiated in the name of adjudication of penalties. See, quite a few years back, 2020 I'm talking about, it was the Companies Amendment Bill 2020 which was brought in by the ministry, and it was a good news to all the stakeholders that many of the offences have been decriminalized. So many of the offences under the act, and almost at this moment I must say few dozen or just a dozen of the offences are still under the banner of a criminal offence, for which the companies and its officers, they used to opt for the compounding applications. Rest of the offences have been decriminalized. Now they have been classified as a criminal wrong. Right? See, there is always a rule that when the offence is punishable with a fine, it's always either a court or the tribunals who used to impose the fines. But when the offence, the nature of offence has been altered, and now when it is classified as a civil wrong, the registrar has been authorized, empowered by the government to initiate an action under the Companies Act. There is section 454 in which they are now considered as an adjudicating officers. There are certain things which are still unresolved. Unlike compounding, wherein a voluntary application is always before the ROC we used to make. So voluntary application for compounding is possible, but there is no clarity in this act that whether a voluntary adjudication is possible or not. Secondly, I've seen in almost so many orders which has been passed in a recent, you can say, this amendment through which the rules have been notified, and on that basis several registrars are imposing a penalty. Now, one more thing which is provided in this section when read with the rules, that ROC cannot impose a penalty below the penalty prescribed under the Act. Now, the big concern is it mandatory that registrar, adjudicating officer, after service of show cause notice, is always a duty bound to initiate an action and impose a penalty? Because many a times when we respond to such show cause notices, many of the clients believe that it is to the extent of best satisfaction to the adjudicating officer. But in spite of that, they face the hearing notice. Hearings used to be scheduled and the orders are being passed wherein the hefty penalties are being imposed. Now, point number one, there is no provision which states that a voluntary application for the adjudication can be made. So now that area is still empty. If I face some non-compliances and if I suo motu wants to make an application, so whether it can be possible or not, and in that circumstances, whether the registrar can impose a penalty, being an adjudicating officer, can they impose a penalty below the threshold limit or the penalty, the minimum penalty prescribed under the Act? That is point one. Point number two, in case if the registrar has initiated an action and if I submit my reply to that show cause notice, even thereafter the registrar is under obligation to extend the matter up till hearing, or with its due satisfaction they can drop the matter or they can drop the action initiated by them by the way of show cause notice. Now, one more thing in this particular case is wherein the companies or the consultants, even the auditors need to take care of is, here in this case, not only the notice are being served to the company or notices are being served to the directors, but also to other person. and this other person may be the consultant, or maybe the advisors, or maybe the auditors, or any certifying professional. Even they may face the issues under section 454. So that is again a point of concern for the companies, and not only the companies, but its consultants or advisors or an auditor. So I must say that the rules are still required to be amended, because I've seen when you see rule number 3, rule number 4, it is provided that there are certain parameters on the basis of which the adjudicating officer, that is the registrar, they used to impose a penalty. So on one side they have defined a parameters, size of company, or loss to the public, or else the turnover of the company, or reputation of the offences. So there are so many parameters which are prescribed. But per contra, when it is provided that a penalty cannot be imposed less than the penalty prescribed under that particular section, then that will not make any difference, even if the parameter is matching, is in my favor or not. So I must say that this requires some attention. The government should come up with certain clarities, and the flexibility should come in if we talk from a viewpoint of ease of doing business. Because see, there are so many non-compliances which are ultimately not at all causing any harm to any stakeholder or public at large, but unnecessary penalties are being paid by the company's director out of this adjudication process. We will keep on coming up with more clarity on the subject, but it is required that a government should react upon it, the adjudicating officer should react upon it, and they should give a concrete, you can say, the way outs, or they should come up with some concrete points or suggestions before the ministry. Because at this moment wherein the economy is just bouncing back on track, now such notices are not creating some much more or better differences in terms of compliances. Many of the clients are now thinking to divert their operations to a partnership firm, or they have tested a bad experiences just because of such notices and the reaction of the adjudicating officer thereon. So many more clarities are required from the ministry. The concern with regards to voluntary application for the adjudication is also a grey area, wherein the ministry should come up with some clarity. On one side there are certain parameters defined before imposing a penalty. On the other side, when Act states that penalty in no case shall be the less than the amount of penalty which is minimum prescribed under the Act. So many things which are contrary within the Act itself, and the reaction of the registrars are actually not in favor of the corporate houses, or I must say a small business enterprises which has recently started doing its business in the banner of a private limited companies or the LLP. So that's it for today, and we will keep on coming up with such kind of, you can say, matters wherein there are some lack of clarity, or there is no clarity, or wherein some clarity is required from the ministry itself. Thank you.